I give the call to the member for Pearce.
Of charities, which was raised earlier, the Financial Services Council estimate that charitable trusts alone will save more than $2 million in compliance costs with the disbandment of the ACNC. And that's obviously money that could be allocated to charitable areas, that is to say, the recipients of charity. So, like all these things in the deregulatory area, the arguments against deregulation are theoretical, but the effects of actually deregulating are practical and real, and in this case $2 million on trust savings. But Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, a motion ostensibly about Western Australia, where in 15 minutes from the opposition we had no more than one sentence actually addressing issues relevant to Western Australia, and I thought I might touch on a few issues relevant to Western Australia just to break that small habit. But before I do that, I wanted to place it in the context of the notion of this motion, and the motion does have an element of spin about it. And we hear that word often, but spin is actually defined as the act or practice of attempting to manipulate the way an event is interpreted by others, often in a way which is contrary to the best reasonable assessment of the quality of the act. There are, of course, two basic types of spin, Speaker. The first is where you have an event which, on the best factual evidence, is a positive event, and the practice of spin becomes to try and have people interpret it negatively, or alternatively an event which, on the best factual evidence, is a negative event, and the practice becomes to try and have people interpret it positively. We have an event here, which is the deregulatory agenda of the coalition government. And a good example of a negative event tried to be interpreted positively, so this story goes, and I understand this is from the internet, so it must be true, but there was a Miss Wallman who was a professional genealogist, and she was doing work on her own family tree. She discovered that a relative of hers was also a relative of a US Congressman, Harry Reid. And it turned out that the great uncle of Mr Harry Reid, Remus Reid, was hanged for horse stealing and train robbery in Montana in 1889. And the only known photograph of Remus Reid shows him standing on the gallows in Montana Territory with, on the back of the photo, the inscription, Remus Reid, horse thief, sent to Montana Territorial Prison 1885, escaped 1887, robbed the Montana Flyer 6 times, caught by Pinkerton detectives, convicted and hanged in 1989. Now, Miss Wallman, so the story goes, corresponded with the good Congressman's office, and he sent back through his staff a description, a biographical sketch of his great uncle, and it read, Remus Reid was a famous cowboy in the Montana Territory. His business empire grew to include acquisition of valuable equestrian assets and intimate dealings with the Montana Railroad. Beginning in 1883, he devoted several years of his life to government service, finally taking leave to resume his dealings with the railroad. In 1887, he was a key player in a vital investigation run by the renowned Pinkerton Detective Agency. And in 1889, Remus passed away during an important civic function held in his honour, at which, sadly, the platform upon which he was standing collapsed. So, an excellent example, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, of an event largely negative but spun to look positive. And what we have before us is a motion attempting to do the precise opposite of that and take an event which is largely, in fact overwhelmingly positive for WA and try and find some kind of negativity in it, no matter how minor, imagined or pretend. And in actual fact, what we've got here is a classic example of a motion where there is a massive expanse of silver lining in the sky, and we're trying desperately, Labor's trying desperately to find some kind of imagined cloud. And the event that we're interpreting here is yesterday's deregulation event from the coalition government. Legislation tabled and documents to repeal more than 10,000 unnecessary and counterproductive pieces of legislation and regulation, 50,000 pages of unnecessary and costly regulation. The effect will be $700 million a year in compliance cost savings. That is 1 year. So the accumulation of that effect is extremely significant. $700 million in year one, $1.4 billion, $2.1 billion, $2.8 billion. And for Western Australia, some of the headline features are particularly beneficial for WA. The NOPSEMA reform, to have a one-stop shop for compliance for offshore oil and gas, is a massive savings of around about $120 million recurrent a year Australia-wide, but WA represents 75% of oil and condensate production and 55% of Australia's gas production. And so accordingly, the share of WA's benefit of that $120 million odd saving in compliance costs is about 80%. So in year one, WA's compliance cost saving to the WA economy is $96 million, year two, $192, year three, $288, year four, $384. And we're here talking about spurious arguments about the charity sector inside a motion about WA. I mean, WA's mineral and petroleum exports represents 89% of the state's total merchandise exports and 47% of the share of nation's total merchandise exports are WA. And we're getting rid of the mining tax as part of this deregulatory package. Here is a massive expanse of silver lining. There aren't any dark
I
clouds.
thank the member for Pearce.